depending where you are. It's still morning for me, it's afternoon for you. My name is Olga, and I'll be teaching, co-teaching the course on digital authoritarianism today. And we begin with our first lecture. Before we start, I probably will have to share a bit details about myself. So I've been here, I'm here in the UK, where I'm finishing at the moment my PhD about political responsibility of IT business. And quite for a while, I've been studying technology, and it was my major research topic. I started quite innocently doing research on online dating and stuff. I would have to ask people to mute so there will be no echo. So I started with online dating and progressively moved towards more complicated topics, just diving into social media, and then finally ending up in the overall political stuff, studying IT businesses. The first time I came across the topic of digital authoritarianism was the first few years ago when I did my research on Russian IT business. And I had to dive deeper into the relationship between the technology and the political power within Russia. So that was the point when I discovered the topic. Yes, this is the coexistence between the technological side of it and the political side of it. So digital authoritarianism was there on the radar. I started studying it. After that, I was lucky to join the team of Advox, which is the part of Global Voices Project, a team of digital activists with whom we did quite a fascinating research. And we did the research on digital authoritarianism worldwide. It covered about 20 different countries. Russia was including in one of them. And it focused on 4 different aspects of digital authoritarianism, where I was responsible for looking at what's happening within the domain of information. I'll tell you a bit more about that, but this is my story of how I encountered digital authoritarianism. While we are starting our lecture, and when I will be talking about the background of it, it would be very nice to meet all of you too. And the big question is, why are you here joining this course? What's your relationship with the digital authoritarianism and the topic of this? What's your major driver and motivation to study this course? So anything you'd like to share with us, please put it in the comments. We'd like to take a look at this later so we can adjust the course so they're on the go. This is the first time we're doing this within the Charles University. So yeah, we're very flexible and we'll be happy to approach the topics which you are particularly fascinating about. All right, so without further ado, this is me. If you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand and interrupt me while I'm doing this presentation. I'm very happy to stop. And in the chat, please tell me where are you from, where you study, and why you're taking this course. What's your interest in digital authoritarianism? And while we're collecting this, I will begin the lecture. All right, so that was a bit of the interaction I did with the very first slide. So why are we even here? If you take a look at this slide, you will see a quite fascinating picture. It represents the way how the political regime's been changing over the years. What do we see here? Well, first of all, it's a fairly positive news, right? So from the 18th century, the end of the 18th century, the picture becomes a bit more positive. We have more of the diversity of the political regimes, and it's not all the closed autocracies it was in the very early and post-Middle Ages. So there is more diversity in the number of political regimes and the types of political regimes. However, despite the world being in a way more free, when we have such types as liberal democracies, electoral autocracies, and closed autocracies. This is the typology which is provided. The scholars, they see that there is a sort of decline in democracy, right? So what's the difference between these different types of political regimes? In closed autocracies, you have 0 political rights and freedoms. In electoral autocracies, you do have very centralized power, but you still have elections in. And then 2 of the democracies, they do have a bit of a variety. Liberal democracy is the type of political power, political regime, which we are kind of striving forward to get to, right? So it has the political freedoms for all the citizens, and then there is a chance for people to participate in the political processes. In electoral democracies, some of the political rights can be compromised, right? So it could be, here and there. So overall trend in the world is fairly positive. However, the last couple years, starting from probably the late 2010s, scholars do see the decline in number of democracies, and this is a very kind of thrilling moment. At the same time, unfortunately, the population of these countries is not even, right? So all the countries, they do have a different number of people, different population. Therefore, in democratic countries, unfortunately, we have less people living, and it happens as so that more people do live in either autocracies of either type than living in democratic or semi-democratic regimes. And the Freedom House report suggests that it's 8 out of 10 people for 2022, people living in a partly free or not free country at that moment. So this is more than the half of the world living in not free regimes. So overall, the world is not that of an illusionary democratic place, which we want to think of, right? So the majority of people living in the conditions of some sort of the restrictions, of the political restrictions, which are happening along with the changes and advancements in the political regimes. As we know, the political freedoms, they go hand in hand with other freedoms which exist within the society. And one of the institutions, if you wish, which falls, quite corrupt when there is some sort of a political instability is press, right? And according to the combined report of the Reporters Without Borders and the same Freedom House Index, if you take a look at the left side of the slide, you see the map. And there, this map indicates that the situation with the press freedom is not that happy either, right? There is a handful of countries marked with green, which identifies as a good situation where press has freedom of operating, that it's not repressed by either legislative or other political powers. Unfortunately, all of us, we can't live in Norway, right? So most of people, again, looking at this map, they live in the countries where press is experiencing some sort of unfreedom or repression, which varies at different scores. The darker the color on the map, the worse the situation is. And again, you can see that the population in these countries is usually higher than the population in the countries where the situation is good or at least satisfactory. So these all just signifies one very dystopian trend. We're living in the less democratic times, and we're living in a time when the press is under the decline. Meanwhile, in the internet which came up there to be the place where democracy would be happening, with all the hopes for the open discussion and decentralized connection and the opportunity to reach anywhere in the world. Global internet freedom rating has been declining for the past 13 consecutive years. And this is a very long period of time, right? So for many of you, that could be even half or even over the half of your life. So me, it's more than the third of my life, and it's most of the time when I've been an adult. And we see that it's getting worse and worse and worse. Unfortunately, there is an increase in repression and violence for online expression, which has been identified in 55 out of 70 countries, which fall under the review of the Freedom House. So they take a look at 70 countries and see the way the internet is functioning there. At the same time, the technology developing, and again, with the hopes for further development of artificial intelligence, for instance, it doesn't come to free us all from the repression and oppression. It does the other way around. AI is currently used for escalating such things as disinformation, even though it could be used in both hands, right? So manipulation of online discussion via artificial intelligence has been documented in 47 countries. Again, it's more than half of the countries under the review. And it happens again in both democratic and less democratic countries, which are free and not free. Also, AI is used to enhance online censorships. That, first of all, it comes with the legislation, right? So the platforms are legally required to remove content upon the request. And this is the law in 21 countries out of 70. And again, it depends, who do we have there, as bad guys or good guys, right? So using AI for finding and identifying bots and trolls could be very beneficial and can be very healthy for the social media environment altogether. However, unfortunately, it could be also the repressive apparatus of the state using artificial intelligence in order to spot the posts, social media posts and social media discussions, for instance, or other content online which goes against the internal policies of the country, and therefore it can be used to take this content down, which in the end plays out as what, as a censorship. So I am painting here quite a gloomy picture, right? So we have a huge number of countries which are declining their democratic rights. We do not have free press in the world. So the whole institute of press is getting worse and worse. And at the same time, the internet, the place which we're supposed to bring this freedom of the discussion and be the place of the, like, if you wish, like, you know, Greek agora, the place for discussion and the articulation of whatever issues appearing in the communities, it is under decline as well, and it's getting worse and worse. Therefore, we are looking at the side of a change in the society, and we see that the political freedom comes hand in hand with technological development. And this is what we are discussing today, and this is what we will be discussing during this course. This is what's called the digital authoritarianism. Let's take a look at the definition. It says that digital authoritarianism is the form of political and social control, a method of governance in which authorities utilize technology and media, well, media, you know, today is very technological as well, to restrict freedom, manipulate information, and exert control over society, suppressing discussions and opposition. In other words, what is digital authoritarianism? Digital authoritarianism is when the government, the authoritarian government, is using technology in order to advance its authoritarianism, in order to advance the repression and freedom in this society. As I've mentioned earlier, I've been a part of the research team which was doing the overview of digital freedoms worldwide, and it was our research was split. Outside of covering 20 countries, it was split in 4 different sectors. It was first data governance, then access to the internet, information, and surveillance. And I find that this classification of the tools is the most adequate for today to understand like the scope of the digital authoritarianism. So as the tech is developing, there is more and more into this, but these practices, they can be clearly broken down into these 4 parts. So let's begin with the first one, right? So data governance. This is the access to the information about people. So how do you store, how do you keep the data and message exchange, the personal information, whatever comes with you and your online experience appearing within the internet space, right? Then we have access. And this is what comes with the internet shutdowns and disruptions. It is when the government is or is not controlling the access to the internet as it is, right? So in some countries, the internet can be there and any content can be available there, but other countries can turn this thing off, right? So it's like turning off the electricity in the country or in your house when there's this dark outside. The same thing happens with the access to the internet. Without access to the internet, you cannot engage in discussion. You cannot do pretty much anything. And it becomes a very powerful tool of control, which is mixed, you know, it's happening online and which is happening, again, face to face. So this type of shutdowns, internet disruptions is frequently being used when political dissent is happening. So in order to suppress the protest activity, which can be organized through the action online, internet shutdowns are a frequent tool of using it. Then we have the information, and this is one of the most widespread tools of digital authoritarianism, which is rooted in times way before internet was invented and brought into the public use. So this is the cases of censorship and information manipulation, right? Propaganda, in other words. However, it's not news for us, it's kind of old news, but with the usage of the technology, propaganda and information manipulation becomes more widespread, and it's more easy to disseminate, and it has a greater reach. So we can say that in terms of misinformation and other types of manipulation of online discussion, the technology is playing the amplifying role, right? And it also finds different ways. For instance, this could be the cases of astroturfing or inauthentic coordinated behavior online. Astroturfing, the term which you might have come around, is referring to the use of the fake grassroots efforts that can be focused on advancing public opinions on different topics. So what does it mean? The grassroots activity is when people are bringing up their voices and then producing some sort of idea, and then this idea plays as one of the demands of the government, right? And then the government is changing their policy or applying a new policy for whatever issue. Astroturfing happens quite frequently lately. This is when you have paid promotions and paid fake not really authentic activity of, let's say, bloggers who would rise up, and then suddenly you have this whole social hysteria online, and then it looks like something very natural. Other people looking online content, they can take a close attention to what's happening, and they think that this is something authentic, right? So this blurry line between authentic and inauthentic, this is something that is happening a lot within the domain of information manipulation. And the other hand of this, so we got the astroturfing as one of the new techniques, which is different a little bit from propaganda for the old school times. We do have inauthentic coordinated behavior online. In other words, this is when we have this bots and trolls coming and flooding in the conversations online on different social media channels or on traditional media outlets online. So again, how is it different? It's different in terms of perception. And this is something which is going to be widely discussed during this course, especially in the latter part of it. Right, so manipulating the public opinion with the number of inauthentic personalities which are playing the role of authentic internet users. It's very delusional, and therefore it's a little bit different from the old school propaganda where we didn't have such a high number of people who could be seen as regular folks, right? Just joining into the conversation. Okay, well, you probably know quite a lot about it. So let's revise. So it's data governance, how your data is used and how it is collected, documented, and therefore how it could be transmitted within different institutions, and what type of access the government authorities, secret services, the law enforcement has to your personal data. So what do they know about you? Then we have access to the internet altogether, internet shutdowns and internet disruptions. These are the two major types of seeing digital authoritarianism in the world. Then we have information manipulation, which comes in a variety of forms of propaganda, disinformation, misinformation, the usage of astroturfing and bots and trolls online. And the fourth practice of digital authoritarianism is surveillance. And yeah, so I am here in the UK at the moment. I don't live in London, but London is the is the city with the most number of surveillance cameras in the world. And it's scary, right? So mass surveillance happens offline and online. And again, it's amplified by the technology. So this is the systemic monitoring of citizens' activities, either on the streets with the usage of surveillance camera data or via monitoring discussions online. It comes in different forms. And again, combined all together, surveillance, data governance, and access and information provide a magnificent number of tools which can be used against a single individual, but also they can be used in a way to navigate societies towards particular types of behaviors, particular types of thinking, and particular types of conformity towards this sort of freedom. So this is digital authoritarianism, and I hope that this brief overview helps you to see how many different formats are there and how it can advance the function of undemocratic society. Thank you. Sorry. All right, let's move on. So about this course, what we're going to do here. The structure of the course is the following. We have only 3 topics. Unfortunately, that's as much as we can cover. The first topic will be, the first topic number 1 and topic number 3 will be taught by me. And we'll be looking at first cultural and contextual origins of digital authoritarianism. This is what's happening today during this lecture. And then we'll have 3 different meetings to discuss this all, right? So we try to make this course as practical and applicable and interactive as possible. So we're only going to have 3 lectures, the time to listen, and we will record all this lecture so you'll have access to it later on. But I do encourage you joining us for seminars and for this lively debate. During seminar number 1 and seminar number 2, we'll take a look at the digital authoritarianism in discussion. I'll send you all the discussion questions in advance so you can prepare, and I will also share the reading lists with you. And our workshop number 1 would be called Inside Digital Authoritarianism. This is going to be a little bit of the role play when we will split and take different roles of different actors which exist, right? So the press, the legislators, that could be social media users and tech companies, and we will try to see if it's possible to resist digital authoritarianism in this playful scenario. So the first topic introduces you to what is digital authoritarianism, how does it work, and what is it all about. We probably will not be able to cover, the whole variety of different types of digital repression. However, we will take a look at as many contexts we can, and also you will get a chance to, just to grasp on and then continue your own investigation and research as you go and study these things online. Topic number 2 is focused on the information manipulation. And as I mentioned, we can identify 4 different areas of digital authoritarianism. And it seems to me that worldwide information manipulation and propaganda, even though it's old news, it still remains one of the main and crucial, most used and the most advanced tools of digital authoritarianism in various societies. So I find it very important. This topic will be taught by a colleague of mine, Ilya Yablokov, has been done research on Russian disinformation quite for a while. And then the topic number 3 is surveillance and advocating for digital rights. This is when we take a look at surveillance, and we really ease off a bit towards the end of our course and take a look at our own practices. As we said, right, so we want this course to be very applicable to your everyday activities and whatever you happen to do with your life. We want you to stay safe and be able to maintain digital safety. Therefore, we'll have a number of seminars which will help us to go towards this goal, right? So we will discuss the role of civilians and the way it's organized, and mostly this would be during the lecture, and I'll try to make this lecture as interactive as possible. Then we'll have an invited lecturer, Andrei Zakharov. He is a journalist. He's done quite extensive research on studying the way how people adjust to this digital freedoms, particularly on the case of Russia. And then we will discuss why people take this on, right? So why they're not protesting, why they're not bringing the change. And here is a hint, there might be some reasons to do that. And we'll have a personal digital safety seminar with Denise Yegordin from the NGO, which deals with social technology for non-for-profit sector. And and he knows lots about VPN and other ways how you can protect your own data, and we'll talk about how this data can be used by bad guys. And we'll finish up with, coming up with some sort of action plan, and we'll draft an advocacy campaign for a change and for digital rights. That would be another workshop, which would be also facilitated by me. Okay, so that's going to be our course, and this is what's going to be happening with us. You see the dates, and after each of the classes, I will send you an email with the suggested readings and seminar workshop questions. We do have a final assessment for this course, and this is an essay, and you can see more details about this final assessment in your syllabus. But the main thing is that, you will have to reflect a little bit on whatever you're studying during the course, do a little bit of the research, and to try to write a reflexive essay about the issues of digital authoritarianism. If you have any questions in the end of this presentation, there will be my personal email. I am in the transition between institutions at the moment, so I only have my personal email, and you will receive the presentation, this presentation, and list of literature along with the seminar questions after this class. So you will have my contact details. Don't worry about that. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask. It could be either in the chat, or you can just join me by contacting me via email. And I see that I do need to hurry up. You only have less time left comparing to what I expected to. But I wanted to do a little bit of the exercise, which would be familiar for those who've been attending the Open Doors Day. So here is a list of the countries. We have 4. We have Russia, Jordan, Costa Rica, and Nigeria. And I wanted to ask you to put these countries in a row in the order, ranging them from the most free internet to the least free internet. I will open the chat at the moment. And thank you so much. There are 2 people who shared their interest in the course, and I'll get back to this. So which country do you think is the freest in terms of its internet, and which is not? Russia, Jordan, Costa Rica, or Nigeria? The floor is yours. Someone, please give me a hint. 1, 2, 3, or 4. Costa Rica, Jordan, Nigeria, and Russia. Marek, okay. Yeah. Okay, so I think most of us are clear that Costa Rica is the most free and Russia is not as free as any other country. Well, let's take a look. So what's the answer? Yes, some of you are right. So Costa Rica is not just the country with the best weather, but also the country with the best internet. And also, it surprisingly has quite a long history of democratic activity and fair elections and the rotation of political powers. Fantastic. However, these days, the government is experiencing a number of rising cyber attacks. Then we do have Nigeria and Jordan, well, coming almost hand to hand. It's just 13 points different. They both marked as partly free, but they do have different issues there. So Nigeria is the place where elections been running fairly recently, and guess what? The social media were not blocked during these elections whatsoever, and this is good news, right? However, in Nigeria, with this diversity of the different political powers presented, these these all political powers, they just shattering each other with disinformation. So disinformation is huge in Nigeria, and it is really destabilizing the country. Also, the authorities, they are now hitting on a track with regulating the online space and introducing new cyber attack, I think, legislation, which is meant to suppress this activity online. So again, it's the situation which is developing at the moment. So Nigeria is suffering from disinformation. Jordan is a bit the opposite, right? So Jordan is a monarchy, and again, there is a different political situation, and there is more established political power, and the opposition doesn't have much of the voice. Therefore, in Jordan, the proliferate way of maintaining the digital control over the society is the internet shutdowns. You will be surprised to know, but in Jordan, social media blocked during school exams. I mean, I don't even know what to think about it. Maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's not a good thing. You know, you're just not scrolling TikTok instead of preparing for your exams, but you're rather doing something else. You may be even preparing for your exams. However, probably blocking whatever and restricting access to whatever is not very good. Yeah, right. I would rather advocate for a free internet. Nevertheless, in the south, I think, of the country, recently there was some sort of protest activity, and there was the internet shutdown, so it just closes. Also, the opposition is being prosecuted for the discussion online, and it's not very legal there as well. So the situation is a bit worse, but Nigeria is heading towards a Jordan case as well. And Russia is not free at all, and the situation is getting worse and worse, especially since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The legal situation in the country is getting worse, and once the Meta and sites such as Facebook and internet and Instagram were pronounced as extremists and blocked in the country, then we do have a political prosecution of the dissent, of the criticism online, of the discrimination of public authorities in the relation to the war in Ukraine. So all these things, they are very legal centered, right? So it's again a little bit different way of putting it. So this is the legal control of the online information, but empowered by the artificial intelligence and a whole huge number of people looking at different activities online. It is becoming digital authoritarianism, right? So you can be punished for whatever you are saying online, and it's illegal in the country. So here is a little quiz, and this is a little bit of the variety of what we're going to be going into. Okay, so I have two big blocks, well, actually three big blocks till the rest of the lecture, which I try to cover in the remaining time. And the first one is the predispositions for digital authoritarianism. I identified four of these. So in this part of the lecture, I'll try to focus on why digital authoritarianism is happening in the very first place. There are cultural, political, technological, and legal factors to do that. But as you have already probably guessed, and as you probably know from your personal experience in real life, it's never one factor or another. It's always a combination which plays out. So the cultural factors. Well, some of people would say that there are some countries which are more prone to being authoritarian, and others do have a stable democratic tradition. Why is it happening? Yes, of course, this is a sort of the path dependency, right? So different countries do have different cultures and experience different historical periods. And those countries who happen to be lucky, who lucked out to be in the circumstances and the conditions where democratic institutions could cultivate and grow naturally, they do have more chances to sustain and resist digital authoritarianism, rather than the countries which have the history of repressive political regimes playing out. And Russia, in this particular case, is a fairly good example, right? So it's never managed to get out of the autocratic control of the government. It did not make it into the fully democratic combination where different political actors are presented. And therefore, we can say that there could be historical precedents of authoritarian rule, right? And if people in the country never experienced this and they didn't value that, or if people in the culturally do have the attitude towards authority, high respect towards authority, probably introduction of these new laws and introduction to this new surveillance tool or other tools of maintaining repressive control over society would not have much of the resistance. But I have to say here that, again, everything in every society, it's not like you're born unfree. This is a process which happens gradually. And if there is an authoritarianism-prone government in the country, it probably will introduce new legislative acts slowly, one by one, and then slowly again dismantling the institutions which could control it and which could oppose it, right? So this is the suppress of the protest. It happens slowly. This is the suppress of the jurisdictional power, which happens slowly, and the takeover of these different institutions. And at the same time, and of course, the main and the crucial one is the suppression of the Institute of Press, right? So this is when the press is not free. And also, as researchers outline, this can be accepted in the society and normalized through a set of discursive activities. So again, living in an authoritarian state is a little bit different from living in a democratic state, because you slowly would have lacking different freedoms. But as they happen gradually, people discuss this and the media discusses this, and then this is presented as something which is normal, right? And this normalization is happening slowly as the regime progresses. So let's think that there are some state control media, and the state control media start producing some of the narratives which normalize the oppression in the country, say that there are good people and bad people. And then slowly the independent media are being muted with the usage of the variety of tools. And suddenly this narrative of the state-dominated media becomes the major narrative. And this is the only narrative people have access to. And as it is a gradual process, you dive into it and it becomes the everyday activity, and it becomes the everyday reality of yours. And you can't even notice, because there is no, big change which happens just overnight. It happens one by one. And if you think you can tolerate some sides of the regime and you can go on with this because you have your normal life in whatever it could be, your organization, or it could be the family of yours, right, where it's different, you think it gives you some sort of power and the sanity to get along with insanity which is happening outside of you, you just learn to live. Because people are very resilient human beings. They need to live, they need to survive, they have children, they have families to feed, they have stuff to do, they need to go to work, whatever this work is. And this is what I observed in my own research when I've been studying Yandex as an organization. It's like Yandex is a Russian Google, a company which was known really well for its liberal attitudes within it. And Yandex was happily existing throughout of the slope towards the authoritarianism which was happening in the country, to the toughening of the authoritarianism, just because some people would find it normal to stay there, are surrounded by like-minded people. But as the company grew, more people with different opinions would come. So people who would be pro-state and people who would be supporting the existing political power. And suddenly, as you don't want to fight over politics within the organization, you start cutting off these discussion topics from your everyday discourses, from your everyday discussion. And then you just accept whatever is happening. And it happens not overnight, it happens over the time. And soon, through 20 years of its existence, the company is absolutely different from what it was in the very beginning. But also at the same time, when we're looking at people who exist in the authoritarian context, we can't say that, they're just happily waving the flag and going to support whatever terrible things the country is doing. Rothberg, one of the scholars who studied Holocaust, actually, and he studied other ways of cruelties organized in different societies, also like apartheid in South Africa, stuff like that. So Rothberg comes up with the concept of implicated subjects, right? So he says that these individuals or groups who are implicated or involved in systems of power, oppression, or complicity without having explicit consent or awareness that this is happening. And let me just provide you with some sort of example, right? So we all are implicated somehow into our life through everyday activities and institutions we are linked. And sometimes we do go and buy things online, and we don't really care how this clothing could be produced, for instance, right? But buying some stuff from the internet, from the particular shops, can mean that these clothing have been produced in terrible conditions and with the oppression of other workers who've been employed at their sweatshops, right? So at these factories. And without knowing this, we support the system of oppression and we support injustice. The same thing is happening in the authoritarian regimes. As I was talking about this Russian Google, the company Yandex, which works in Russia, people there working there, they are also implicated as workers in the company, producing technology which can be used in order to control discussion online, right? So Yandex has a number of services, one of which was, for instance, Yandex News, which gradually removed all the sources of opposition information and opposition media from its algorithmically controlled feed. Therefore, following the law of Russia Federation and the way authorities tried to control it and being complicit, people working at the company, they did foster the spread of the censorship in the country. Therefore, they were just implicated through different layers, they being tech workers, and the tech workers of the tech company, and the tech company following the laws of the oppressive regime. And here we go. Without being capable to do something, you just reproduce bad stuff in the world. So these are the cultural factors, and I think that these two concepts, they can be very helpful in understanding this. What else is there? The political factors, of course, and we discussed this a lot, right? So again, you have a beautiful map showing you the disastrous state of the world at the moment. And one of the bad things and the politics which are happening, first thing is the centralization of power. Centralization of power is the worst thing, and it helps to maintain digital authoritarianism. Here we go, China and Russia, perfect examples. In China, we have Communist Party, which has centralized control over all aspects of government, including digital infrastructure and information dissemination. So we have the party which controls two different fields which together navigate the democratic space. And the same, Russia became super centralized under the rule of Vladimir Putin, and it was the official rhetoric of it even, and aligned under the Kremlin. So there was a control implemented over media outlets first, then internet service providers and online platforms, right? So you have the central power, and you do not have the way to resist it because there is one, like a pyramid, so it controls different other institutions. The second, letter B, weak democratic institutions. This is when you do not have the elements of civil society to confront the power. And when the power is centralized, it's really difficult. Usually the first thing it does, it gets rid of civil society, right? So when you don't have fair elections to choose people, when you don't have institute of media who can articulate and bring to the discussion what are the problems with the society, what are the problems with the society, then therefore it cannot be lit up and it cannot be brought to the attention of the public. So you can't really go along with the democratic norms. And Venezuela could be a good example of this. And there are still elections in Venezuela. But unfortunately, like judiciary power is co-opted by the Maduro's government, and then there is a lack of independence in the government, and there is a suppress over the opposition voices. So these leads to the new legislation being introduced, and that leads to the restricted digital rights of people in the country, right? So this one, the weak democratic institutions, it's very much related to the third one, the lack of checks and balances. But what are the checks and balances? This is exactly the number of institutions, diverse institutions, which can check over each other and balance it. The term is coming from American political system, but unfortunately, doesn't work much in the most of the world, right? So there are no much checks and balances. And one of the examples could be, these hybrid regimes, the regimes which are still considered hybrid, right? So it could be Hungary or Turkey. And these both are places where elections are happening, and there is even some competition which might be appearing there. But at the same time, the judicial power is corrupt. So the law and the court is on the side of the existing authorities. And at the same time, there would be a huge oppression of the institutes of media. In the end, these 3 points, the 3 political factors which can foster the emergence of the digital authoritarianism, they can be get reduced, right, to the absence of free media, the absence of free courts, the absence of free elections, and the absence of I forgot what would be the last one. Yes, the absence of the civil society to organize a protest and to articulate the interests of different interest groups in the country. So when you do not have this, the digital authoritarianism is flourishing, because each of these factors, it would be fostering the adjustment of the legislation, the development of the technology, and the suppression of any sort of dissent or the opposition towards the acts of digital authoritarianism. The next group of factors, technological factors. So you, first of all, if you want to do digital authoritarianism properly, you do want to have a proper infrastructure to this. And this is surveillance infrastructure. As we mentioned already, surveillance does not only happen when the camera is spotting you and from your home to wherever you go and back, but also surveillance is happening online. So you want to have a really sophisticated infrastructure which allows collecting a lot of data about the citizens, particularly about the physical movements or about the digital actions online. And again, good example of this is China. In China, well, the Great Firewall is fantastic, even though it's not a surveillance tool. I mean, it's fantastic in terms of its efficiency and the way how it not hiding, but how it protects the citizens of the country from the information flows which can be coming to the country, but also with a very diverse system of surveillance infrastructure, facial recognition technology, biometric data collection, networks of surveillance cameras, especially which are working to control over certain population like Uyghurs or political opposition. So it is there. A very similar one is introduced in the Middle East. It's called Falcon Eye. Again, it's the whole assemblage, right? So it's a set of different surveillance tool which combines online monitoring with the camera activities. Falcon Eye in United Arab Emirates, CCTV cameras, license plate recognition, and altogether it creates the portrait of a certain individual which can be prosecuted personally, right? So it's the whole bunch of data, and it can be used by the government to control its people. Control over information flow. And this is what we've been talking about earlier. This is the propaganda goes wild and pumped up by the technology. It happens both digitally in terms of like hardware and software. So controlling the communication online, what is produced by the user, but also controlling what can enter the country and the internet there and what can be shown, right? So removing content, controlling the traffic, and monitoring communication online. And the last one is the use of technology for social control or social engineering, right? So Saudi government is doing this really well by tracking online activities. And this is what we've been discussing over and over again, really, right? So you engineering a certain version of the reality by filtering the content, by censoring online discussion, and by producing the narratives which are helpful for the particular political regime, right? So you have the picture, the image of new reality, and those who have dissenting voices, they're muted. And this is how the technology is used for social control. So, but to do this, you need to have technology itself, right? And this is very important. So some countries who wish to do that, they might not necessarily be able to go on because they don't have their own technological means. But then this is when the legal factors can play on, and then countries often use technologies produced by other countries. And here I have to tell you that many countries, particularly in the Middle East, and in Asian countries, they buy technologies from Western countries who produce this instrument online, which can be used for either good or bad, but in the end, they're used as a tool of digital authoritarianism. Nevertheless, something very important here is that technology itself might be considered as authoritarian prone in a way, right? So as we take a look at what is happening with our social media and our online discussion and with the technology which has a widespread use, we have Facebook, we have YouTube, we have WhatsApp, and we have X, formerly known as Twitter. It's all driven by a handful of bizarre or very charismatic leaders. And the way these companies operate is often lacks transparency, right? And under these conditions, we have a business which own personal goal is to create capital and to produce more money. Unfortunately, these prone towards developing certain types of technology which does not necessarily serves the democracy really well. It rather serves different types. So first thing is the algorithmic bias, right? So social media tend to prioritize high engagement content, and this high engagement content is not something complicated long read produced by The Guardian trying to explain you the particular peculiarities of the political processes. No, this is long and boring. It fuels on high engagement, angry, loud videos of people who might say absolute nonsense but being very charismatic. And this sort of content proliferates over the internet. Meanwhile, we do have the systems of personalization and recommendation. And you probably have noticed that once you get on the TikTok, you start scrolling and it chooses the topic, and then you just gonna dive into this whole thing and being absolutely bombarded by these messages. And if you combine this two, you have a high engagement content, which is going to be personalized, and the recommendation system is going to take you into the loop towards the echo chamber, where the sort of the information circulating would be very similar. And it, again, it helps to create that sort of reality, right? So we say that the operating logic of the absolute capitalist invention of this technology firms, such as social media, it does have serve the functions of the goals of the authoritarian state. Create a bit delusional picture of the reality, a bit distorted one, but it does so in order to keep the user on the platform. Therefore, it can be said that this system, the platform, is authoritarian itself. So it kind of serves not the democratic way of thinking and values, but it serves authoritarian way of thinking and authoritarian values. And then we do have civilians. The social media, they collect absolute shit tons of data about you, about all its users, and it can be used by governments on demand, right? So when there is surveillance and then there is all this data collected in order to make users buy more, sell more stuff and make more money, but the same data can be used on demand by the government in order to suppress the dissent, to find people and do whatever. Therefore, we have this absolute shift. So this libertarian empowerment and progressive uplift, which was supposed to be brought by tech platforms, it's being substituted by the populist discussion, authoritarian logic, this echo chambers in which people exist and are fed by the same information which confirms their own biases, and it can be even fueled up by the extra information produced by the governments. Long story short, again, so what I'm trying to say is that the nature of tech platforms we're so keen on at the moment, and which I bet will not exist in 10 years' time, is prone to authoritarianism. And unfortunately, tech companies never do enough to resist it, right? So it can be used in bad hands, and it's being used. And then if something doesn't work with the tech, so as I've mentioned, there are some countries who don't have their own social media. They have Facebook, they have WhatsApp. Then what comes in play is the legal factors, and authoritarian governments start exceedingly producing different legislative acts, legislative acts which control what's happening in the online field. These laws are usually ambiguous and repressive, and we'll talk way more about this further on, but you can take a look at the source later and follow it to have a nice overview of the different regulations. Again, long story short, just to save time here, often in the repressive states such as Russia or China, the same laws which are developed in the democratic countries are encouraged and produced, but they're used against the citizens of the state. And the introduction of these laws is happening under the need to protect its citizens, right? So, for instance, the data lending. At some point, Russia obliged all the foreign companies, all the social media companies and big tech companies to store all the data about Russian citizens at servers in Russian Federation, on the territory of the Russian Federation. Well, you can say that, I mean, this is the legitimate right of the country. They want to protect the personal data of its users, so it's not going to be stored elsewhere. So let's say a foreign government would not have access to this type of data. Unfortunately, you do not have functioning checks and balances and working institutions. The storage of the personal data can be always accessed by the law enforcement on demand, because there would be another legislative act which would allow that. And then it becomes another surveillance tool, and it becomes the failure of the technological company which never managed to store the personal data of people it is inviting to its users in a particular country. So, for instance, a very similar thing happened, like, for instance, in China. when Apple handed over the encryption keys for the communication to the authorities. And it is a very big thing because the encryption, it just helps to maintain secure conversation. And with the encryption keys, you can decode whatever sort of information is being communicated and sent over the tools, the technologies. So this legislation is getting more and more of the effect, as you saw me talking about Russia, about China, but also it's happening in other countries as well. So it's a very powerful tool because all the companies, they have to comply with the laws of the country where they operate. And therefore, they became these implicated subjects, right? So you can't violate the laws of the country, even if the law is repressive. And authoritarian regimes leverage on this massively. We do have just, I believe, 20 minutes left for this lecture, and I do have whole 2 topics to cover. Let's take a look at the example really in a bit of the rush of how these 4 different factors play out in Russia. So what is Russia? Russia is a hybrid regime which turned into full-fledged authoritarianism. We've got all the perfect things: corruption, unfair election, political prosecution of the dissent, and since the invasion of the Ukraine, it just went bollocks, and the political freedom is non-existent there, with the most institutions for checks and balances and democratic resistance has been destroyed there. This political power comes hand in hand with the capitalist system, not with capitalist system, sorry, with the economic system. And there is authoritarian capitalism, which navigates the existence of the businesses. Why it is important. With digital authoritarianism, despite Russia being a country which does have its own technology, this technology is not usually produced by the state. These are the private companies which are producing different technologies which are being used, right? So it could be the provision of surveillance cameras. This could be social media, VK, Vkontakte, one of the Russian social media. It could be the search engine, Yandex. I've been talking. It's all are privately owned companies. However, within the system of authoritarian capitalism, again, principles of authoritarianism are practiced to organize these capitalist relations. What does it mean? It means that the state has all the rights. I mean, not all the rights, but okay, the state can open the door to this company and say that they need something from it. Therefore, there is state control over internet service providers and online service providers altogether, right? So it's not just, the companies which provide internet, but other online services. At the same time, ever since Vladimir Putin came to power, there have been established control over traditional media and what's called the dictatorship of law. It's well discussed in this article by Italian author. Dictatorship of law, introduced again by the leader of the country, Vladimir Putin, at some point as the counterbalance to the wild 1990s which were happening. This is that the legal system does control quite a lot what is happening in it. However, returning back to the previous stages of the lecture in the legal factors in Russia, over the past 10 years, there have been a number of different legislative acts published which provide a beautiful legal architecture for control over these media sources. And unfortunately, it works because the judiciary is not free as well, right? So the courts are controlled by the government, and then there is legislation which legitimizes the control over the online service providers. And in this country, in Russia, the interest towards the IT emerges from late 2000s. And the triggers for it were Orange Revolution in Ukraine, the Arab Spring, and the mass protests in Russia, which happened, several times in the year. So this is the country. You probably know about it. How does digital authoritarianism play out in it? There are 5 different areas of it. The first one is the network state, the sovereign internet project, SORM, surveillance, and the prosecution of the criticism online. They all are legally motivated. So the first thing, the network state. The big dream of Vladimir Putin is to create a high-tech solution of the country, and not the solution of the country, to create a high-tech state. And he talks a lot about the technological breakthrough, and Russia is fairly well technologized in this way. It has a number of online services which help with the daily routine things, like from doctor appointment to electronic appointments for whatever other reason is. We have an electronic passport. So it does create a lot of support to the everyday activities of citizens. But at the same time, having own social media, having own search engine, and having own other services comes on cost, because all these countries, all these companies, they exist at the territory of Russia and they operate under the Russian state. So we can say that Russia is a network state with all the digital services available there, which you can access, but at the same time, it has all the data stored, and it provides opportunities to using these tools in order to suppress the political dissent. So that's the first bit, right? So this is the technology bit. Russia has the technology. What happens next? This technology is being ever more complex, and it discursively played out into the what's called sovereign internet project, fueling the need of people and the ideas of people towards protection. The idea of sovereign internet was introduced to protect Russian citizens for all the bad stuff happening in the Western internet. Again, East-West confrontation. So sovereign internet project is a combination of the software and the hardware and legislation, which allows to do all these fantastic things: traffic rerouting and online content filtering. So through a series of introducing different technological tools, all the internet traffic coming to the country can be rerouted, so it can be not come through, and then content can be filtered, so not all the content can be exposed. There is a organization, a state agency called Roskomnadzor, who has access to fairly all the traffic coming to the country and all the websites existing in the country and all the content which can be there or not be there. So it can block, remove, slow down, or block the access altogether to any form of online activity. And this is highly centralized. It was built over the years. This all is leading towards the internet censorship, and at the same time, as I've mentioned, with the project of sovereign internet, it also requires organizations and online service providers to collect data about its citizens, about its users, and if it's not a Russian company, there have been additional legislative act which is calling for data localization, right? So all the foreign companies, international companies, required to store data of Russian citizens online. This is, in a nutshell, is sovereign internet project. Here are a bit more of the details and deep packet inspection technology. So, well, basically, all the internet service providers will have to have a black box in their offices. So the Roskomnadzor allows itself to have the access to virtually any content on the internet. And instead of decentralized control over the websites, in Russia, there is a list of the websites, all the websites which are happening there. They have to be translated into numbers, right? So instead of the domain name, there would be a number. So the Roskomnadzor, this agency, it has the whole list of this. So they have of these websites, and they can identify, and they can block, or they can slow down, or they can remove any source of the information via this technology. At the same time, in Russia, VPN are banned, and all the other ways to access internet freely are also blocked by the legal grounds. So this is what makes this internet sovereign. Let's just skip on. This particular slide, we do have a list of the legislative acts. So from 2010 until now, there have been a gradual introduction of different laws which regulate different aspects of making this possible, making this happening. As I said, the control of the online information, then data localization, then Yarovaya law, which is data storage, which requested the online service providers to store data about their citizens or their users, for extended period of time. So this is the project of sovereign internet. It can be turned off and can be isolated from the rest of the internet, right? So Russian citizens won't notice this. Initially proposed to be a security tool in case the evil Western countries would try to mess with the Russian internet. It eventually became a tool of the censorship and the place where Roskomnadzor, this agency, can control all the content, all the traffic, and whatever is happening online. The next one, secret services, SORM. This is the technical means system for ensuring operation search measures. That's its nomenclature, kind of naming. It was invented in 1980s, and initially it was focused on telephone communication. So basically this is when security services can overhear the conversations on the telephone on the demand. With the emergence of the internet, SORM number 2, the second version of this system was introduced, and it required online service providers to collect all the traffic data of different users for one day. And then in 2016, it was extended and asked to collect personal data of users for a long term. It's up to 3 years. What does it mean? It doesn't mean that all the messages would be collected, but all the metadata would be collected. So basically, it's the infrastructure for a super online surveillance system for any user, which can be requested by government officials on demand and any time. The European Court of Human Rights brought up 2 decisions that it's the system, the existence of the system is violating human rights in the country. Unfortunately, it is still there, and there have been several loud cases how this technical means have been used to suppress the dissent, and how it's been used to follow up the opposition. Also, the information from the surveillance cameras has been used. Moving on. Surveillance. There is this thing is called a safe city program. So the surveillance cameras are being introduced, particularly in Moscow. There are quite a few in order to maintain the security. And if security cameras do help to, they really do help to solve some crimes and to find people who violate public order. Unfortunately, in Russia, it's been used to find people who've been noticed during the protest activity. And only in 2023, 595 court decisions has been made and issued for people participating in the protest, and these people have been identified by the surveillance cameras. And this is absolutely outrageous. 141 prevented detentions have happened by using this data. So surveillance cameras have been used to find people who've been noticed during the protest. And also after Russia invaded Ukraine and the partial mobilization was declared, surveillance cameras has been used to find recruits who've been hiding from the mobilization. The last but not the least, prosecution for the criticism in line. This is where we started our discussion and our lecture, talking, doing this little quiz. As I've mentioned, in Russia, there is a number of legislative acts which do prosecute for the criticism, particularly related to the invasion of Ukraine. This would be the criticism towards public authorities or the military, for the Russian military armed forces. Unfortunately, these laws are very vague, and pretty much any kind of discussion can be considered as fake or even extremist. And the courts are using this intensively, opening up cases against people producing this sort of content online. Therefore, just summarizing, as I see that we have to finish about now. Am I correct? I can't see people. Do I have more time to finish, or I think the class should be over about now, right?
I think you have more than 6 minutes.
I do have 6 minutes.
Yeah,
okay, so maybe we can rush through the end of it. Okay, so looking back, looking at the case of Russian state, looking at the case of the Russian state, you can see how different factors, cultural factors, legal factors, technological factors, and political factors play out. With a certain history of the Soviet Union, and then the slow, gradual dive into authoritarianism under control of the Vladimir Putin, with the dismantled institutions of media and civil society, which could produce some sort of checks and balances without fair courts and fair elections, and the applicability and availability of the technological tools produced by either private companies or by the state agencies. This is happening, and it is all legitimized by the legal factors, by the laws which are outlining what is right and what is wrong. And this is how the country is slowly sliding into the acceptance, being implicated into various layers of this digital authoritarian system, which does not provide the opportunity to go against it, right? And to do something to change it a bit. So Russia is one of the very good, unfortunately, cases of how digital authoritarianism developed, but many other countries, they follow either, or they just adopt similar methods. And this is when we talk about the case of authoritarian learning, right? So different authoritarian leaders, they learn the best techniques from each other. China, Turkey, Russia, Bolsonaro and his disinformation efforts, and even Donald Trump in the United States, it all comes, to be a publicly available way of navigating societies. However, I wanted to finish this lecture on the positive note that there are different means of resistance and producing resilience towards digital authoritarianism. And the first one is the virtual private networks, the usage of VPNs, which unfortunately is illegal in Russia. And then you can use encrypted channels of communication, messengers such as Signal, and it used to be Telegram, but Telegram is very, very questionable. I do have big doubts about the safety of Telegram for its users. And then the development of the decentralized communication network. So fewer people should have the access and control of users' data, and with the technological opportunities, the traffic can go and not be accumulating in one point where it can be accessed by whoever is the representative of a certain country. So the development of this decentralized communication networks, which can be based on the blockchain technology, which was a big word a few years ago, but then it it's not anymore. However, it could be the solution to go against digital authoritarianism and respond to censorship and surveillance, right? So you can access content which is censored by using VPN, right? So it's when you're connected to the internet of a different country, and then you can avoid surveillance by using Signal as an encrypted messenger or developing further decentralized communication networks. Then there are multiple organizations which are dealing with advocacy and activism, and they're doing their best to advocate for human rights and for digital rights. For instance, there is a list of 5, and RightsCon is the conference organized by Access Now, I think. So all these organizations, they have a bit of a different focus. Some of them are advocating for digital rights. Some of them are advocating against surveillance. Some advocating for freedom. Then the multiple internet watchdogs, fact checkers, educators. So they're beautiful people who are collecting all the data. They're documenting the cases of the violation of digital rights of people in various countries. It's not big cases like, we all know about Russia and China and even about Venezuela, but like, who knows about Azerbaijan, even though there is quite a lot of restriction coming towards the media. But there are people who are collecting all the information about all these cases. And if you're interested in this, I think you might just follow up with this organization and try to network a bit and see if you can work with them in the future, either as a researcher or as the activist. And then the last but not least, tech companies. I'm very doubtful about tech companies, and I don't think that they care, and I think they could care less, and they never do enough. However, Google just recently has been developing some sort of new software development kit, which is supposed to help building censorship-resistant features in the applications developed by users. So Google is doing this, but at the same time, Google is the one who's been complying with all the laws in Russia, removing information from the search results. And Google was the one who also has this algorithmic feed, which were circulating pro-state narratives online since Russia invaded Ukraine in Russia. And I know that tech companies might not have all the capacities to do that, but doing a little bit more towards resisting the authoritarian tendencies and requests of the state could be useful. Like, again, Google, who withdrew from China after it couldn't cope with the local legislation. Yet, who knows if, since Google left China, China hasn't changed much, and the authoritarian leaders continuously grow their own platforms, and they substitute really well. However, like with the case of, for instance, Facebook in Myanmar, it could have been done a little bit more to prevent the genocide and the hateful speech being circulated via the platform, which to this day remains like the equivalent of the internet and is absolutely controlled by the malicious groups who are in control of the country. Anyways, so if there would be a little bit more transparency over what social media and other tech companies are doing, that would be great. If there would be a bit more of transparency about artificial intelligence models, that would be great. However, as you see, like the best forms of AI which exist to the dead, plus generative AI, is the generative AI produced by private companies rather than by the open source developers. So it probably is possible to build a freer world with more transparency and empowering all the activists. And there are many people who are happy to engage in civic action and to work against this. But unfortunately, tech companies exist like they freaking hate each other and they don't want to work with each other, and neither they do want to work with the representatives of the civil society. So resisting digital authoritarianism, resisting the government pressure, and reclaiming internet back after 13 years of the decline would require a lot of collective action. And it doesn't make sense to me why the internet as the place which initially was built to enable this action doesn't make it to the day to organize against this action. So yeah, I hope that we'll keep looking at this good guys and bad guys battle, and finally we'll see the good guys winning. And with this, I wanted to end the lecture for today. I am very happy to take your questions. And if you don't have any, I'll send you an email later today over the homework and readings for the seminar next week, which will be discussion seminar. You will have all the discussion questions in advance and things to read. And yeah, thank you so much for joining me today.